guys, another day, another do-it-yourself video. Today we're removing an engine on a 2012 GLK 350. I'm not sure which other cars this might apply to. If there are any, you'll see them listed right here. And never done this job before. I already purchased a new engine and we're going to be detaching it from the transmission. Oh, I bought an entire refrigerant recovery setup. We're going to be working under both situations, whether you want to swap your old compressor with the new one that most likely comes on the engine, or you just want to keep your old one, which will be a lot less time consuming and a lot less expensive. So just a heads up, right now I have a battery maintainer on it. Not sure if you really want to buy one of those or not, but not expensive. I finally got one, and we're gonna get some motor mounts, and then I'll show you the tools and parts before we get started. The minor backstory here is I ultimately found out that my chain fell off, and instead of replacing all the parts and stuff, the engine's pretty old, 250,000, so we're gonna go ahead and just swap it out. All right, let's get going. On the back of your engine, here's where you'll find your engine number. Okay, first thing, we release the parking brake, put the car in neutral. You'll be leaving your key in the ignition for this. And then we disconnected the battery. I just have this thing charging it up slowly, and then we're gonna put the car on jack stands as high as we can get them safely. Here's my current setup, so we can get underneath there to detach the transmission first. I also removed the two panels, not this front one here that goes along the front, but the two flat ones behind it. Let's get those off, and then let's get under here and remove some oxygen sensor wires. Quick note, I did already remove these two air hoses and the cover for this guy. Every step after this is going to be covered in complete detail. Okay, I already did this step. It requires no tools, but we got the oxygen sensors unclipped and then we released them, and they're now completely out of the way. And you're such a capable person, we filmed them before we did this because we don't want to get them mixed up when we're putting it all back together. Our front oxygen sensor on the left side needs to be unclipped in a couple places. There, and when you follow it back, there. The next step is to remove these two bolts and these two 13mm, as well as these other two on the other side. We're going to get this bracket off here, two parts with a rubber piece in the middle, and put it aside. Okay, there's gonna be a lot of tight shots. I apologize. Got that off. That should be enough to get this going, I'm hoping. Let's remove this cap right here, and behind it, we're gonna find the 6 torque converter bolts, T55. Okay, here's the torque converter bolts. They're right now staring at me like so, but you're not going to be so lucky. You're more than likely going to need to turn the engine and see if the bolts have appeared like they are now. This is the first pair, and we're looking for 2 more pairs, 6 bolts in total. And so it's going to be a procedure going back and forth underneath the car and then up to the front of the engine. I'll show you what I'm doing, but I wanted to note that upon installation, because these are angled bolts, it's a bit of a procedure, meaning we're going to start by getting them a little more than hand tight, and of course that means turning the engine, going back and forth and whatnot, 4 Newton meters, and then going around all over again and making sure each one is 30 Newton meters, and then going around once more, tightening each one a final time 90 degrees. They want you to replace these bolts, but I'm going to be using the same ones. So I'll probably tighten them on that last and third go around to something like 30 degrees probably. Anyway, I'm going to remove these two, and then we're going to go about the process of turning the engine. Here's my current setup. It's a 1/2-inch wrench, 1/2-inch extension to a 1/2-inch to 3/8 adapter, and then the T55 socket is 3/8 onto the bolt. All right, the first 2 bolts removed. Now here we are, back up the front of the engine. We lift this cover up and off. Make some more room. 1/2-inch wrench and 27mm socket. We're going to want to turn this thing a third of 360 degrees. So the other two bolts are going to be facing out that little eyelet, right? The next pair. So this is just an estimating game. I'd rather be a little short than a little long because we want to emphasize not turning this engine the wrong way. And it's got to go clockwise when facing it. So, and you can actually get this handle down here far enough to where one giant swoop will do the trick. So I would start at about right here and all the way as far as we can go until it butts up against here, and that should be perfect. And then we'll go back underneath the transmission and check it. All right, back underneath the car, and one more inch or two would have done the trick. But here we are, we can see the first bolt, and we will maybe use a larger screwdriver and nudge it. Let's loosen those two, get those out. Okay, so we got all 6 of them torque converter bolts out, and now it's time. We're going to go ahead and start removing all the bell housing bolts for the transmission, disconnecting it from the engine. So where I wanted to start was middle of your screen, the bottom bolt for the starter, and it's also the bottom bolt for a bracket that holds those oxygen sensors, E14. Okay, here's the setup I'm using on the bolts we can clearly see, which is essentially not the top 2 bolts. And then when we get to the top 2, I'm gonna add another, whatever this is, 5 inches or something like that. Before you fully remove the bottom starter bolt, let's keep it in there a few threads. Come around to the front and let's focus on removing the 2 lines to the starter first. Middle of your screen, you remove that cap and remove the bolt underneath it and the bolt that we can see here, 10mm. And then we can fully remove the bottom starter bolt and onto the top one. We got the starter out. Now is actually a good time to spray as best you can these bolts holding the catalytic converters to the manifold. Ideally, you want to get it in through the top, down onto the threads, this side, but the other side as well. And that also includes the other side of the engine as well. Can you see it there, middle of your screen? Best case scenario, we let it sit overnight, really. You don't have to right now, but let's remove the air filter here. One clip in the back that's already released, and upon installation, of course, remember to plug this back in just so we can get better access to the bolts. That's removed. Let's do one quick step and we're gonna pull that release forward, make some more room. So the starter is out, and then above that is the other bolt holding the bracket, and then there's 2 on top of the transmission, which is gonna be blind work, but I think we can manage all the way around counterclockwise. We might leave one bottom bolt in and snug that we'll remove at the very last second as far as I'm concerned. The 2 top bolts are out, and now we got this one that you can barely see. Let's remove that. It's kind of hard to get to. And the next 2 bolts have nuts behind them. Long socket, 16mm. I'm gonna loosen these up first and do it that way. Okay, both the other 2 long bolts with nuts behind them removed. Now we have 4 left. 2 of these guys hold on this bracket. I'm gonna remove this bolt, middle of your screen, and then this one, and I'll leave that one in. I'm not gonna touch it, and we'll get that one off. We're gonna leave this bolt for last. After we move these 3, we're gonna cut a piece of wood and stick it where this bracket is partially blocking down to the floor, and that'll be our prop for now. We need 1 bolt plus the 2 transmission guide dowels hidden up in there and the rear cross member for now, and then of course the prop when actually removing the engine. All right, every case is different here, but I cut this 2x2 to 19 inches, and I'm gonna center it about right here. But before we let that get in the way, let's first roll around and remove the bolts holding the transmission lines onto the oil pan down here. There's going to be 2 on each side. There's the second one for that side. You can see this one. And there's the other one. Let's get all 4 of those off. And oh yeah, one more step. I think after we remove these 4 manifold bolts, then put that prop in place, I think we're done down here. All right, those 4 bolts are out and the 2 long ones are on this side. And then I got the catalytic converter bolts out as well. It just rests on the subframe here. You may want to plug the catalytic converters if you don't want any spiders or weird stuff getting in there. The prop is in place. And then let's get up. We're going to start the refrigerant recovery process. Quickly here so as not to bog you down too much. First, I opened both valves on the recovery tank. There was no hissing noise, so I imagine that was pointless. Closed them back up and screwed the yellow line to the low side. Then the other end of the yellow hose to the vacuum pump. Plugged in the pump, made sure the oil level was correct. Turned the pump on and then opened the low side. And we're going to leave it here like this for an hour, creating a vacuum in the tank now. All right, back outside again. We got some vacuum in our tank and we just set everything up for the second half of this process. Extension cord if you need it. Recovery tank. Most important thing to note here is I had to buy a R12 to R134 adapter here. Otherwise, it's not going to fit to this dryer filter. And though it may appear that it would up here, it doesn't fit there either. So get that. Here's the setup. All the valves are closed and we connected them to the low and high side here. Just to be clear, you can take this filter off and you have the threads coming off of this piece, but they're not deep enough. So we leave that piece on, which this little hose fits onto beautifully. And this thing comes with the recovery tank, so you don't need to buy an extra one, which I made the mistake of doing. All right, let's get started here. Oh, and I got lucky when I ordered this extra hose. It's R12 to R12 as opposed to this guy, which comes with your manifold set, which is R134 to R134. Okay, here's how we're going to do this. Open, and we're going to listen for leaks. No leaks, I don't think. Open, and open. And then on. And we're going to open this until we hear it knocking, and then we're going to back it off until we don't hear it anymore. Okay, that didn't work, so I just stopped at the liquid. And I believe the last step, we're going to open this guy to the tank. The video I saw, he didn't mention opening this valve, so we're going to call this How to Evacuate Your Car's AC System the Right Way Part 2. And then, since these guys are already as low as possible, I'm going to open this guy. I'm going to open this as well. Yeah, let's... Anyway, the gauges are back down, and that means all the air is out of the system. Gauge is back down, so it's time to turn it off, which means close, close, close and close, close and then off. And now I'm going to close this guy, close this guy. And now we're able to start disconnecting all the lines and stuff. Let's put these caps back on, even if it's somewhat temporary. All right, the next step is to remove this engine wiring harness. And that involves disconnecting this connector, pulling out here, and following it all the way back. I'm sure that means we're going to disconnect these 2 connectors. And I already removed the zip tie that used to be here. So release that, get this out of the way. Okay, that's out of the way. Let's get this thing unclipped. You can see my thumb here. I'm gonna pull back on a tab and lift up. Okay, we're sort of following official documentation now. I want to remove all the coolant because it's nice and new. So we're going to remove all 10 of these 8mm bolts. Remove this panel first so we can drain the coolant. All right, panel's out. Let's loosen this coolant reservoir cap just so air can push the water down. And then we're going to grab a nice clean 5-gallon bucket and so we're gonna remove the lowermost hose connected to the engine. You can see a bit of it here. I'm gonna unclip it and pull down, and that should get as much of the coolant out as we need. We drained all the coolant out to a well-placed 5-gallon bucket, and then I came under here and I stuffed it with a shop towel just to keep it from dripping too much. Now we're gonna remove the oil, which is the next step, and I wanna save this too because this stuff's new. 13mm, draining it into this thing. So the newer engine comes with a compressor on it. By looking inside that box, I can see it, but only one plug plugging the low side to keep dirt and grime from getting in it. That compressor's got 50,000 miles. This one, obviously 250. Luckily for us, we can remove this engine without disconnecting the AC lines. The documentation says we can just remove the compressor and tie it to the side. So I'm gonna do that for now. So that means you could skip all the air conditioning stuff that I did in this video. That means you wouldn't have to buy any of the AC tools I mentioned, nothing. If you wanna keep your same compressor, but in my case, we're gonna follow the documentation and I'll make that decision later. So that means removing the serpentine belt here. We're gonna put a 17mm on the tensioner, and then we're gonna loosen it enough to give us some slack to release the belt and pull it off. All right, that's off. Removing the compressor now. First step, we want to remove the connector. I was able to pull the connector out from this angle. You can see behind the top bolt, and it's coming out a little bit. I just need to pull it out the rest of the way, but it's a hinge on the top tab and then pulling it out. Tough angle, tough squeeze. May I even wish you some good luck here. The top bolt runs parallel to the bottom bolt, E12s. All messy and gooey, but middle of your screen. And then for the third and final bolt, you can see it from the back. Okay, right there. Middle of your screen. Let's release those three. All right, 100 mini turns later, the compressor is free. As expected, it's a tough job. The rear bolt will come out in your hands. The top bolt and the bottom bolt, those are gonna stay with the compressor. And I'm just gonna make sure that I free up the electrical connector up top, just so it doesn't get caught up when we lift the engine later. Here's how I strapped the compressor to the subframe. 5 zip ties, and I pulled the compressor forward, was able to wrangle the zip ties behind the pulley a little bit, and I'm gonna guess, since my new engine is coming with a serpentine belt attached to it, that most of these eBay auto dismantler resellers are just chopping off the lines around the engines, which is what they did in the case of the power steering here. So all we have to do is remove that bolt in the middle of your screen, E12, and remove this low pressure side right above it. Has a factory clamp around it. We'll have to wrangle that off, save that hose. But before we do that, speaking of hoses that we need to save, we're gonna remove this line, get it out of the way to make some room, and that means 5mm or a screwdriver. Remove that clamp, follow it back, gently pull it out of its clips and the end here. All right, the line is off. Be careful and patient. You don't wanna break any other lines. So yeah, let's get this bolt off first, and then we can mess with the hose clamp above it. So the bolt is out and we're gonna pull the hose out now and then immediately plug it off on both sides. We don't want any dirt because these are hydraulic lines and even the smallest particles. All right, here's a close-up of the factory clamp, left side of your screen. The goal is that grabs over like so. And we want to pry the top part off. I wasn't able to find a plug for the side opposite the high pressure line, but we plugged this side off as well. And obviously we're gonna have to replace this clamp with a new one. And you know what? We're gonna follow this high pressure power steering hose back to where it bends here. And I'm sure it's being held up underneath the car now by a bracket, which is just a 10 millimeter. Let's remove that nut and release this thing from its holding place. All right, we're making some real progress now. Now's the time we're gonna go around the engine here and just remove the stuff that's connected to the firewall around it. First thing would be this upper coolant hose. We'll loosen that clamp, pull this out, pull this clip off straight up off this oil filter housing, maybe tie that out of the way. And then this line to the vacuum pump, that's missing, so we'll remove it by pinching these tabs on both sides, pull that out, and I'll figure out how to get it off on this end. Just pinch these tabs in like so and pull it out. The fuel line is next. That just means loosening up this 17 millimeter nut on the end here. Be careful, it may spray at you. Tie that out of the way. And then this coolant outlet to the heater, we're gonna lift up on that clip you see with a pick and pull that off. That entire hose needs to be transferred over to the newer engine. We couldn't forget, there's also this harness going down to all the oxygen sensor lines. Let's pull that up and leave it somewhere up here. We're gonna wanna remove this line coming from the battery to the alternator, which is just gonna be, it looks like a Torx. And then there's a clip down here. Slide that off the alternator. And behind the alternator, there's a cap that you have to pull off and a 13 millimeter nut to unscrew. That'll release this thing from the engine and then we could tuck it back in here. Okay, while I was down here getting this nut off the back of the alternator, I went ahead and zip tied this right side transmission oil line away from the oil pan, but noticed we're gonna have a problem with the oil level sensor snagging up everything, so we're gonna want to disconnect that and maybe get it out of the way somehow. It looks like it used to have a tab in here that we would have to pull back before we press down on the tab and then released it. And not much else. Oh, and for some reason this hose is not on the newer engine, so we'll transfer that as well. I'm gonna zip tie this lower radiator hose to one of these fan blades just to keep it a little more out of the way. All right, now we're removing the two bolts connected on each side from each motor mount. 13 millimeter, middle of your screen. You can kind of see the other one there. Peek it out. It looks like on this one, probably gonna have to go underneath the car for it. I don't know how much y'all need me to cover this, but I'm putting the hoist together. Get out of the way, you big tree. And I started with sliding the legs in, tightening up these 19 millimeters. And then I stuck this piston piece in, put the bolt and nut through, tighten up those 24 millimeters. These legs were already in. And then I put this, we'll call it the rear arm piece in there, stuck the bolt through, and now I'm tightening it down. The top of the piston, 24 on both sides. The handle for the piston jack part appears to be held in 10 millimeter. Now I rented this off of the same guy who towed my car. So I'm not sure about helping you here with this. He did say he was asking a friend, maybe two if I'm honest. Oops, it looks like I need another 10 millimeter. Pump this up so we can put the final arm in there. Now all these bolts can be medium tight and that should be plenty, but I was just handed this. No nut on the end. I'll try and find one perhaps. Pushing it on in. Loosen this guy to drop that. Okay, here's how I'm doing this. The hook came with a giant chain ring attached to it and this seatbelt looking thing, which I'm really just tying up here on the arm to get it out of the way. And then I had two 3-foot chains that came with my engine support, the other engine hoist that they go here and on that side, and it's just a straight bar. And we're gonna utilize both of those in what I think is the best way to do this. I pulled the chain through the hole and it's coming back towards the hook. It doesn't matter what side of the chain, but the first chain ring, it just slides in, and then the second one is this one around the hook. And then the two hooks that came with my engine support bar, I stuck them through the back holes, one, and there's another on this side too, but I put the chain in between them and the support holes. And then the chain is just going over the other two chains. I'm putting faith that this thing is not going to jump over this hook here. Can't really see it as well on camera, but it looks sort of like that. And then to get away with this part, I'm just gonna zip tie these so that they're guaranteed to stay vertical on some level on both sides. Virtually no wiggle room. Okay, let's remove this last bolt. The weather strip that goes along here, I lifted that up, pulled it out. Okay, we lifted this thing just a tiny bit, and now it's time to separate it from the transmission. Nothing technical here. Looks like we got some separation. I'm just trying to wedge a large screwdriver between here and wiggle them free from each other. The transmission from the engine, and then I want to be sure to wiggle the torque converter from what that's attached to, the spider driver, or to make it simple, the flywheel. If we need to raise the engine a little bit to help with the process, we can do that, or maybe even preferably lower the engine if I'm being realistic. Okay, I've done this before in a previous video, but this time I used the screwdriver to wedge against the body of the torque converter and the rim of this eyelet here, and boom, it makes a big glop noise when it frees up. We needed to lower the engine a little bit, by the way. You'll know because you can turn the torque converter freely with your fingers. Okay, I lifted the engine a little bit more this time and heard what sounded like it slipping off of that dowel, middle of your screen. And so I came back down here and wedged it out of that dowel, and the transmission sat firmly on our prop here. So now we just need to focus on pulling the engine towards the front of the car as well as upward, and constantly checking on everything to make sure we're not getting caught up under here or anywhere in the engine compartment. Okay, engine up a little more, and now we're prying the torque converter free. There, that's what it looks like in there. And okay, you can't see in there, but I can see we're free now. So a little more back and up on the engine, and possibly all the way out this time. To adjust the engine towards the front of the car, I'm pushing and wiggling full body weight really on the engine hoist, and looking over my shoulder to get it to come towards me as much as I need. Chains seem to be on there good, and we have the engine up a little more, 3 inches or so, and forward about the same amount. It wiggles freely. Just wanted to note that it's getting a little bit caught up around where our motor mount touches the compressor. So here's what it looks like in terms of clearance. I can't imagine if you have the 273 engine, the V8, you getting this out without removing the mass airflow sensor, which it says in the documentation, by the way. As the hoist would, it sort of comes up and back at you. Not a lot of turning in my case, easy to guide, no problems, except for this minor coolant leak. Let's patch that up with another shop towel. Okay, now I'm gonna gather these 2 bolts, and I want to replace the compressor with the new one. So we're gonna remove the 2 bolts that go to these 2 hoses. Let's free up the zip tie. Obviously, I could have not removed this compressor, these 3 bolts, in the first place. It's a bit of a juxtaposition because these 2 lines are kind of hard to access as well. Anyway, here we are. Let's see if it's not too much trouble with this thing wobbling around to get those 2 off. I'm just gonna plug the hole with one of my plugs, and I'm gonna plug the other sides, and then I'm gonna transfer the engine computer, and then we can start transferring all the other parts that need to be transferred. All right, and for the sake of your time, I don't want to cover anything else. I think we covered it all. Start transferring the parts that are necessary now, and then put the new engine in and reverse the process, right? Congratulations. I'm gonna replace the motor mounts, and then if you need to stick around, I'll finish up with the air conditioning stuff. For the V8s, here's how you remove the mass airflow sensor on the back. There's a hose here, which you have the option of wrangling that off. It's a factory clamp, but easier to just pull it off here. And then you have 2 clamps at the top. 1, 2, you spread those, and 2 clamps underneath, one underneath the sensor. Disconnect the connector here, pull back on this tab, it'll free you up. And then above the pipe here is the last tab. Pry up on that, that'll release this thing. And I imagine if you have 8 cylinders, you're also probably gonna at least want to take out the dipstick, if not remove the whole pipe. On installation, at some point you're going to have to remove the 2 starter bolts that are holding in the new starter. I decided to do it at the last second here. I don't want the engine housing to snag the oxygen sensors either. We're trying to line up this nub coming out of the torque converter with the slot it fits into on the engine side. The ideal angle is perfectly straight, but you have some slack. And then finally, when I get close enough, which I'm not right now, we're gonna line these 2 dowels up with the holes that they go into on the transmission side. And when you get really close and the bottoms of the transmission and engine are as flush as possible, I find that a 1/4-inch extension through the bell housing and the matching hole on the other side, and then wiggling it on, works best. Let's top this off. Be careful about pouring too much in here. It's gonna drop a little as soon as we start the engine, but not too much. And as you can see, I tried filling it about equal parts, and you could go all the way to the brim here if you like before we start the engine. All right, you got hot air blowing out of here. Okay, pulling a vacuum on the system, and that heads to the low side. Let's turn the pump on first, and then let's open the manifold, and then we'll let that sit for about an hour. Okay, it's been an hour. Let's close it, close this, turn it off, and let's switch over to the tank now. Car is on, max cool is on. Okay, here's how I'm doing this. Open, and then we're gonna slowly open this one, and I want to see if I can get any sort of indication that Freon actually does flow through here. At some point rather quickly, we're gonna notice, you're gonna start to hear it cycle on and off. And then we're gonna slowly see the temperature drop. Once it seems to be slowing down, that's when I'm gonna tilt it on its side a little bit. And we're gonna open this so slowly as to not let it go above absolute pressure is what I believe it's called. And this whole process is probably gonna take about 10 minutes. Here we go. Shucks guys, well after all that effort and money spent It seems like I might have messed up the recovery process. I'm gonna go to a nearby auto store, purchase an 18-ounce can, and do it the easy way. Going along swell so far. Just so we know, Mercedes says 35 PSI max on this guy. But I never did hear the compressor clutch cycle on and off, and the middle part is always spinning, but there you have it. Somewhere around there is plenty for me. Hope the job went well for you. Congratulations!